Well, as everyone was getting ready for a nice weekend, everyone in the NHL was scrambling to get to work because of a blockbuster trade that came down on Friday evening. And that saw Mikko Rantanen go to the Carolina Hurricanes, Colorado and Chicago involved in that trade. And we're going to break that down and see what the moving forward path will be for all of those teams here on the latest on the fourth period, presented by CCM Hockey. I'm Kate Pedersen, and Dave Pagnotta joins me. And Dave, you were working hard in the trenches on Friday night. And now we're hearing in the aftermath that one side, Colorado, is saying that they weren't able to get the kind of money that they needed to offer it to Mikko Rantanen. Well, Rantanen's saying, well, I was willing to concede to get a deal done because I wanted to stay. So where
Yeah,
are we finding the truth? What is the truth? Do we have it?
it's somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
It was certainly interesting over the last 48 hours, kind of, both sides coming out and discussing how this process was working. What we know is that these conversations with Carolina and Colorado started back at the draft in Vegas last June. They carried out over the last 6 weeks and really started to escalate as Carolina was dealing with a few other irons in the fire. We know now that Vancouver was one of them, involving either Pettersson or Miller. But when they zeroed in on Rantanen, that became clear from Colorado's perspective when they realized, at least they thought, they wouldn't be able to sign him to an extension. Now, he was looking for originally around 14 million per year on a long-term deal, very similar, if not the exact same, as Leon Draisaitl's deal with Edmonton. Now, they argued that they weren't able to get to that number, and we found out this morning that Mikko Rantanen telling reporters that he was willing to concede a little bit to get less than market value, to sign for less than market value to get a deal done. All right. So what does this all mean? What it means is that Mikko was willing to go under 14, and I think he was willing to go a little bit under 13 or in and around that. Market value for him hovers around 13 to 14 and change. So depending on how you view things, semantics, really. What confused him and maybe caught him off guard was the fact that in the days leading up to the trade, conversations with Colorado and his agent, Andy Scott, had picked up a little bit, and there was seemed to be, I guess, potential pathway to a deal down the road. Nothing was imminent, but it seemed like they might have been making strides. Colorado obviously viewed that a little bit differently and pulled the trigger.
All right. Well, now he's in Carolina, and they've spent a lot to get a guy for 6 months. So they've got to find a way, you think, to sign him long term. How confident are they that they can get that done?
Before they make this type of trade, they have to understand where the ballpark figure is. And I've got to imagine they understand it's 13 to 14 million in that range, probably closer to the 14 million mark to get him locked in. The ownership group led by Tom Dundon in Carolina would have to basically say, yeah, if we're going to do this, I'm comfortable going in that neighborhood. I don't know if they'll go to the 14 mark, but they seem comfortable to be in the 13 range. So let's see where this develops. They had preliminary talks with Andy Scott over the weekend. They are going to, carry that out loosely up until the end of the year. Probably pick things up in about 4 weeks' time to give yourself a little bit of leeway ahead of the trade deadline. But they also acknowledge that they want Rantanen to be comfortable with his surroundings, get to know everything, get to know everybody, get used to his new surroundings, get acclimated, and then go from there. But they're not pulling this trade off, Kate, without having an understanding internally anyway of what it's going to cost to keep Mikko Rantanen. This is a different situation because of their cap situation than last year's acquisition of Jake Gensel. They made him a competitive offer. It wasn't close in the grand scheme of things to what Tampa ended up giving him. I don't foresee this being a similar type of situation. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Mikko's comfort level of being in Raleigh for 7, 8 years.
Absolutely. Having spent that much time in Colorado, and now
Yeah.
the rug's pulled out from under you, so to speak. All right. Well, you mentioned it earlier. Vancouver was in the conversation with Carolina. Two players we know that they are listening on would be J.T. Miller and Elias Pettersson. It sounded like Elias Pettersson was part of what could have been a big deal, but they went the Rantanen route. So where does
Yeah.
that leave Vancouver now?
Some people say it's square one. I don't think so because they have had a number of different discussions with other clubs involving both Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. It certainly takes Carolina out of the mix, unless they want to just really just destroy the entire market and blow our minds. Carolina's pretty much out of this. So where do we go from here? Well, the New York Rangers still very much involved in discussions. We know Buffalo would love to get their hands on Elias Pettersson. Detroit's had some conversations at some point. Minnesota has. Miller, Dallas. Does Pittsburgh re-enter the mix? They had loose discussions. So there are a lot of different options that are available to Vancouver. One thing is clear at this point is they want a resolution sooner than later. I think more so on the J.T. Miller front than the Elias Pettersson front. If they're going to move Petey, it's going to be for a massive return, and it's going to cost teams like Buffalo, for example, Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram or Owen Power and perhaps another piece in terms of main pieces, and then perhaps some additions that get added on both sides. Does Ottawa enter the mix? We know that Josh Norris has been out there and somebody they're willing to move in a larger type of trade. Thomas Chabot's name is out there once in a while, depending who you talk to. So do the Sens get involved in the PD race and get overly aggressive in that? It certainly sounds like JT Miller, anyway, wants to find resolution. He wants this to end. He wants to kind of at least have the situation move on, whether that's in Vancouver or elsewhere. It certainly sounds like he's willing to waive. I think Vancouver has an indication on which teams he would do it to. Some teams have permission still to continue conversations with his camp. This is going to carry out for a little while here, Kate, until at least one of these guys ends up somewhere else.
Well, I asked you last week, are we near the finish line? And I guess the answer is
Nope.
We thought we might be, but not. The Vancouver saga rolls on. And you mentioned one of the names here that was added to the trade watch list. They updated trade watch list coming out on the fourth period today. Bowen Byram's on there, Jamie Alexiak, Ryan Donato, just to name a few. So of those guys, what do you think their statuses are of the names on that new list?
Alexiak is an interesting one because he's got a year left on his contract after this season. There's a little bit of control. He's got a 16, team no trade list, so he does control part of this process. But there are teams out there that like to go after defensemen that could fit a top four and lock that in for not just one run, but potentially two. So you look at teams like Toronto, you look at some other teams like Dallas that are looking to kind of shore up that back end, even Ottawa as well. So there's going to be interest there. Ryan Donato has had a very good season by his standards, and he's got a $2 million cap hit. For teams like New Jersey, like Los Angeles, like Toronto, other teams that are also looking at the center position for a third or likely fourth line, they're going to come calling Chicago to see what the price tag is for Ryan Donato, to see if they can add him to their bottom six.
All right, well, one last thing. It's coming down as we record this episode, but it's sounding like the Capitals have come to terms of an extension with Logan Thompson. Yeah. What can you tell us that we know so far?
As we're recording this, my understanding is it's a 6-year contract, just over $35 million. So in the $5.5 to $6 million AAV range. We'll see. We'll know by the time this comes out what the actual number is. But the Capitals wanted to get this done. This was kind of short order for them to get Thompson locked into a long-term extension. As I mentioned, 6 years. He's had a phenomenal season to date. .925 save percentage, a great goals against average. His record is fantastic, and his performance is obviously reflective of all of those fantastic numbers. This was important for him, important for the Capitals to get this bit of business done. They have a lot of cap space next season. They're now utilizing a big chunk of it with Logan Thompson now locked into a 6-year deal.
The Caps with cap space. There you have it. All right. Well, thanks so much, Dave, for the insight. And, of course, we'll keep watching Vancouver and all the other teams. We'll see if they can lock Rantanen in Carolina. And we'll stay tuned to the rest as we get inch closer. It feels like it's almost finally time for that March 7th trade deadline. And as always, we have you covered here on the latest on the fourth period, presented by CCM Hockey.